Hi, I'm Jeremy, and today I will be reviewing Sovereign, the final part of the Honeycomb trilogy. Well, here we are. I finally come to the end of this trilogy, and I've got one more video to make on it, and I'm happy to continue doing this. I'm very happy to have read this, but honestly, I probably won't have as much to say about this one, because I feel like a lot of the stuff I covered about the previous two parts in my previous two videos still applies here. And I just want to kind of make this video just simple and maybe shorter than the others. Maybe it'll end up being long, I don't know. But really, more than anything, I just like to encourage people to go out and read these or see them if you find any productions anywhere, because they are just so great, so interesting. I'm so glad I've read them that I don't want to talk so much, because that'll take away from the charm of experiencing it for the first time like I did, because they are so unique that it's hard to explain what's so great about them without reading them or seeing them yourself. Sovereign takes place 8 years after the events of Blast Radius. In other words, it takes place 20 years after the events of Advanced Man. So, in the aftermath of Blast Radius, once again the world is in a different state than it was in the previous installment. This time it's kind of less grim as the state of Blast Radius, but still different. It's still different in not a good way. The characters have changed, especially Ronnie. Ronnie has changed so much by this point compared to how she was in Advanced Man. It was so interesting to see that character evolve. And she's still very much the central figure here, so if you liked her in the previous two plays, you'll still very much be happy that she is still alive and kicking here. What's the main conflict here? Well, Abby is also still alive, except now he is a war criminal. He's actually the worst war criminal in the world, according to the humans at least. He's wanted, and people have so much hate for him that anyone would kill him on sight if they had the chance. Anyone, that is, except for Ronnie, his sister. But once they find out where he is, he's brought in alive to the same house that has been seen in the previous two plays, and that's where decisions have to be made. So that's really what this play is about. It's about what they're going to do with Ronnie, and later on something else comes up. I'm not going to say what it was, because spoilers. Something else comes up that major decisions have to be made about. So this play is called Sovereign, but I think another title of it could be just Decisions, because that's a lot of this play is about making those hard decisions. And this was a lot different from the previous two parts. See, it doesn't have as much suspense as Advanced Man, and it doesn't have as much action as Blast Radius, but what it does have is a lot of philosophy, which is interesting. A lot more of this play is just talking. A huge chunk of this play is taken up by just Abby's trial, his very sort of informal trial, because the whole court justice system hasn't been fully built up yet, but they still have some semblance of it as they're trying to rebuild society. And a lot of that is just Abby having these big monologues, just saying things that really make you think about what the morality of any of this is. Because, again, it's about that conflict between what it means to be human and how you can or cannot, or how you should or should not enforce a lifestyle on other people. We're talking about the conflict between the honeycomb and the humans, but that conflict can be seen as a metaphor for so many conflicts in our real world today. So, how do I like this one in comparison to the other two? Again, I really appreciated the action and the suspense of the previous two, because you don't see that as much in plays, whereas you do see philosophy a lot of the time in plays. So I guess this one felt a little less unique than the other two, which I was a little bit disappointed by, but it's still, on the whole, very unique and very well written. And Abby's philosophies did very much make me think. And he had similar philosophies for different messages in Blast Radius, which also made me think, but they're kind of take more center stage here. The other thing that takes more center stage here is that relationship between Abby and Ronnie. We didn't see that quite as much in Blast Radius. We saw a very different form of it in Advanced Man, but here it's very, very important, and I can't tell you why, but it's there, and it's very touching and disturbing and thought-provoking, like this whole trilogy is. In comparison to the other two, I'd have to say that maybe Sovereign is my least favorite of the trilogy, but only by a very, very, very small margin, because I love this trilogy so much that it's hard to say that any of them are outright bad. This one, I still gave it a 5-star on Goodreads. They really are that good. But one thing I think that was better in Sovereign than the other two parts was its ending, which makes sense, considering it is the ending of the whole trilogy, not just the ending of one play. The ending here is just very beautiful and very unexpected, and by that I mean there are several ways this ending could go, and some of them would have been expected or maybe even cliche, but the way they all come together and then what actually happens is so differently executed than I've seen it before that it's great. I can't think of any better way for this trilogy to have ended. And Advanced Man had a pretty good ending too, but again, it was just that whole thing like leaving you thinking about the suspense. Blast Radius, I really didn't like the ending to be quite honest. I think overall Blast Radius is probably my favorite part of the trilogy because it was just so intense and just right in your face. But the ending was what cut it some slack. And again, it was the second part of the trilogy, so you do have to kind of see it in the context of the whole. It doesn't matter that much. But the ending left me feeling kind of uneasy, whereas the ending here left me feeling so satisfied. Speaking of endings and such, I'd like to go back to the point I made in the last video about how this is a trilogy and as far as theater goes, how well it would read as a standalone. And I have to say that Sovereign would stand alone a lot better than Blast Radius, but not as well as Advanced Man. Advanced Man will still hold the pick as the one that works as a standalone, and if I were ever to direct any of these, which, by the way, I definitely intend to at some point, I really hope I can at some point, I would direct Advanced Man, assuming I couldn't direct all three, which is a very hard thing to do in the world of theater, a very expensive thing too, so just keeping that in mind with this whole thing. I'm looking at this from the perspective of a director, not just a reader. If you are just a reader, then by all means read all three. That's definitely the ideal way to do it. But if you are a theater director or just someone looking to see a play or just look at this in the realm of live theater, Advanced Man would be the one to go unless you're going to somehow produce or see all three. And while I say that Sovereign could be a standalone, it really shouldn't be. I guess it could be more so than Blast Radius could, but I don't think it would be anywhere near as good unless it was with the previous context of Advanced Man and Blast Radius. Not because it would be too hard to understand. I think that you could understand it much more than you can understand Blast Radius if you only read that one. But there are so many callbacks to Advanced Man and Blast Radius and Sovereign, and they're such good callbacks that they really gave you that feeling that you do when you're reading any series or watching any series and they bring back a reference to something that happened before. And these are meaningful references, they're not just like in-jokes. They mean a lot, and those were some of my favorite parts of Sovereign, which is when they called back to the previous two plays. So I think ideally you really should read or watch all three just so you can experience that surprise and charm and like good feeling of recognizing one of those callbacks. I don't have much more to say about this. I know I didn't go into nearly as much detail here as I did for my reviews of Blast Radius and Advanced Man, but I'm just happy that this trilogy exists, and I hope I have convinced any of you to at least look into it or caught some of your interest. I just wanted to share this experience with all of you here on BookTube. This has been my review of Sovereign, Part 3 of the Honeycomb Trilogy by Mac Rogers. Please, I hope you've enjoyed these videos. I hope I've inspired you to at least maybe look up more about this wonderful trilogy of plays, and I'm very glad to have read it. I feel like as a theater person, I have learned a lot from this trilogy. So I can't go on enough saying how much I appreciated this trilogy, so I'm just going to end the video now. So thank you for watching.